There comes a moment silent but irreversible when something inside you breaks, not in weakness but in clarity. You realize you've been showing up for people who stopped showing up for you a long time ago. They smiled when you gave, they stayed when you served, but they never imagined you'd walk away. Because in their mind you were permanent, dependable, forever theirs. But love isn't slavery. Kindness isn't a contract. And your presence was not a promise, it was a gift. Now you're gone, and they say nothing. Not because they don't feel the loss, but because the guilt has made them mute. They beg for you silently, ashamed of the words they never said when you needed them most. This speech is for the ones who gave everything and finally walked away. Unseen dependence breeds entitlement. It often begins innocently. You give because you care. You offer your time, your energy, your presence without keeping score. Not out of obligation, but because something in your nature tells you that love is shown through service, through consistency, through being there even when it's inconvenient. You don't wait to be asked, you anticipate. You don't demand thanks, you find your reward in the peace of knowing someone else didn't have to carry a burden alone. But over time, something shifts not in you, but in them. The person you're helping becomes comfortable. Then comfort turns to assumption. And assumption, when left unchecked, turns into entitlement. They stop recognizing your efforts, not because they're blind, but because they've been conditioned by your reliability. The truth is, when someone always answers the call, they eventually stop being noticed for it. The more consistent you are, the more invisible your sacrifices become. This is the cruel irony of giving too much without boundaries. You train others to expect what once amazed them. And while you remain the same person, still giving, still showing up, their eyes begin to dull with indifference. The gratitude disappears. The warmth in their voice fades. Slowly, they stop seeing your actions as generosity and begin treating them as your duty. They don't say thank you because in their mind you're just doing what you're supposed to do. But there is nothing natural about someone pouring themselves into others endlessly without return. There is nothing normal about being treated like background noise when you've been the melody holding their life together. And eventually, that kind of treatment leaves its mark. It doesn't show up with yelling or conflict. It shows up in emotional exhaustion, in resentment that simmers quietly, in a growing sense of invisibility that eats away at your spirit. That's when you begin to understand what they took as your role was really your choice. You realize that somewhere along the line they stopped loving the real you and started loving the convenience of you. You became a function, not a person, a provider, not a partner, someone to lean on, not someone to care for. And perhaps the saddest part of all is that you didn't change your behavior, they just stopped seeing your value. It's a slow betrayal, the kind that doesn't show up in obvious harm, but in subtle neglect. You start to feel more like an obligation to them than a blessing. They don't ask how you're doing. They don't wonder if you're tired. They just assume you'll be there because you always have been. And what is always available is rarely cherished. This isn't just about relationships or friendships. It can happen in families, at work, even within communities. When your loyalty is unwavering, people assume it's limitless. But every act of giving comes from a source, and when that source is drained without replenishment, it begins to break. And here's the painful truth. You taught them how to treat you. Not intentionally, not carelessly, but by showing up too often when you should have been protecting your own soul. Your silence became their permission. Your consistency became their excuse. And your sacrifice became invisible. But now you see it. And seeing it is the first step toward reclaiming your worth. Because the moment you recognize how easily they took from you, you stop giving so freely. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Because love is not proven by how much you can endure, it's proven by how well you guard your dignity. Silent suffering turns into silent absence. In every relationship, there comes a time when the unspoken burden grows too heavy to carry. The weight of unacknowledged sacrifices, the toll of unanswered needs, and the exhaustion of always giving. Eventually, these things find a way to surface. At first, you suffer in silence. You don't speak your pain because you believe that real love means enduring. It means standing firm. It means taking on the suffering without complaint. You justify it by thinking this is just a phase. This is what love requires. This is what I owe. But what happens when that silence turns from an act of love into an act of self-doubt? What happens when your silent suffering becomes your invisible cage? You start to lose yourself in the very act of being there for someone else. Your own needs become secondary, your own desires go unmet, and you convince yourself that this is just the way things are supposed to be. For a while, you may even feel noble in your silence, convinced that you're the bigger person for not burdening anyone with your struggles. You choose to endure, to smile through the pain, because you don't want to add weight to the shoulders of those you care about. You think your silence will be seen as strength, that the depth of your sacrifice will eventually be understood. You think the person you're giving to will eventually notice the quiet toll it's taking on you. But most of the time, they don't. Over time, your suffering becomes so familiar that even you begin to forget it's there. You push it down, bury it, tell yourself it doesn't matter because in the end, the other person needs you. They need your support, your love, your patience. You become conditioned to believe that your own pain is secondary to their well-being, that your worth lies only in how much you can give. But here's the painful truth: silence doesn't always signify strength. Sometimes it signifies neglect, both from others and from yourself. The longer you suffer in silence, the harder it becomes to speak your truth. And when you do, when you finally find the courage to voice the hurt that's been growing inside you, the response is often either indifference or surprise. You'll hear things like, "I didn't know you felt that way," or "I didn't realize it was this bad." And that right there is the moment you realize the full depth of your silence. You've been silently fading away and they didn't even notice. Your absence wasn't the result of a fight or a dramatic exit. It was the result of you withholding the one thing that could have saved both you and them: your honest voice. It's a quiet form of betrayal when you continue to show up without being seen, when you give without receiving, when you carry a load alone that was never meant for one person to bear. And yet, it's the silence of your suffering that creates the greatest absence. The longer you allow yourself to be ignored, to be unseen, the more your emotional presence fades. You may still be physically there, but inside you start to withdraw. You become a shadow of who you once were. Eventually, this silent absence becomes inevitable. You can only give so much before you realize you've emptied yourself out and nothing is left to offer. You don't walk away with a loud bang or a dramatic exit. You simply fade, not because you want to, but because you've been silently breaking down for so long. Your presence becomes more of a ghost than a person, and even when you're still in the room, you're not really there anymore. This is when the realization hits: silent suffering, when ignored, inevitably leads to silent absence. People may wonder where you went, why you've distanced yourself, but the truth is you didn't leave them, you just stopped being there in the way they were used to. You stopped giving your all without receiving anything in return. You stopped accepting silence as love. And when they finally realize the depth of your absence, it's too late. They've never understood the magnitude of your silence until it's no longer there. And now they are left with the painful task of reckoning with the fact that your absence is the result of their neglect, not the result of you choosing to leave, but of them failing to see you before you were gone. The power shift in walking away. There's a profound moment in every journey of growth when you realize that the greatest power you possess is the ability to walk away. It's not an act of defeat, nor is it an escape. It's an act of reclaiming your sovereignty, of recognizing your worth, and asserting that you deserve to be treated with the respect and love you've always given to others. At first, the thought of walking away may seem impossible. You've invested so much emotionally, physically, mentally. You've given parts of yourself that can never be returned. The bonds you've created have become woven into your very identity. It feels like abandoning these connections would mean abandoning who you are. You fear that leaving would make you seem weak, or that others might view it as giving up on something that could have been. But walking away doesn't signify weakness, it signifies strength. It's an acknowledgement that you are no longer willing to accept less than you deserve. It's the realization that the love, respect, or care you've been giving is not being reciprocated. And sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to step away from the very thing you thought you couldn't live without. But in that moment, when you choose to leave, something inside you shifts. It's a shift in control, a shift in your own self-perception, and a shift in the way the world perceives you. You see, there's a certain power that comes with setting boundaries, and often, boundaries are established only when you stop accepting poor treatment. For so long, you might have stayed, endured, and convinced yourself that your patience would eventually be rewarded. You may have held on to the hope that one day they would recognize your value. But over time, you realize that hope is a silent killer of your soul, and staying only continues to deplete your energy without bringing you closer to what you truly need. When you walk away, the power shifts not in favor of those you leave behind, but in favor of your own well-being. In walking away, you choose yourself, you choose your own peace, your own dignity, and your own future. And while it may feel like a loss in the moment, it's only a loss in the eyes of those who are taking you for granted. The truth is, when you walk away from something that no longer serves you, you make space for something far greater to come into your life. You create room for people, experiences, and opportunities that value you for the person you are. And this is where the power shift becomes even more profound. As you walk away, the person who once held your attention is left to confront the reality of their actions. They're forced to deal with the consequences of their indifference, their neglect, or their lack of appreciation. For the first time, they see the void you've left behind, and in that space, the truth begins to dawn on them. They realize they took your presence for granted, and they see for the first time just how much you were contributing to their life. But now it's too late. Your absence becomes a powerful reminder of what they lost. In many cases, this absence is what forces them to confront their own flaws. They can no longer ignore their mistakes because without you there to absorb the weight of their behavior, they have to feel it themselves. And that's when the true cost of their actions becomes clear. They may beg for your return, they may try to make amends, but the power of walking away has already shifted the dynamic. It's no longer about their comfort, it's about your healing, your growth, and your future. In the process of walking away, you give yourself the most valuable gift: freedom. Freedom from the chains of emotional dependence. Freedom from the exhaustion of trying to prove your worth. And freedom from the suffocating grip of someone who never appreciated you the way you deserved. And while they may see your departure as a loss in the beginning, in reality, it's the greatest act of self-respect you could ever give yourself. You are not a pawn in someone else's game. You are the author of your own story. When you walk away, you reclaim the narrative of your life. And in that reclamation, you find your true power. Delayed realization is a form of justice. There's a strange kind of justice that often unfolds in the most unexpected way. It isn't immediate, it doesn't come with fanfare, and it doesn't arrive in a way that you can predict. In fact, it often takes time, sometimes years, before those who wronged you finally come to realize the full weight of their actions. This realization, although delayed, serves as a powerful form of justice, one that doesn't require you to lift a finger or demand an apology. Time has a way of revealing the truth, and for those who have wronged you, that truth is often an agonizing, humbling realization. When you give your loyalty, your trust, and your love to someone, you expect nothing in return except the same in return. But when those things are taken for granted, when the promises are broken, and when your value is overlooked, it can feel as though your efforts were in vain. You may question why you gave so much, why you invested so much of yourself into someone who didn't seem to appreciate it. But here's the reality: the value of your loyalty was never diminished by their disregard. It remained strong, pure, and unshakable. The problem wasn't with you, it was with them. And here's where the delayed justice comes in. When someone takes you for granted, it's easy for them to think that your commitment, your loyalty, and your love are simply part of their life's backdrop, something that will always be there, regardless of how they treat it. But the moment you remove yourself, the moment you walk away or stop giving what you once gave, their entire world begins to shift. The void left by your absence is something they never prepared for. And that's when the truth begins to sink in. They begin to feel the loss of something they took for granted, and it hits them in a way they never expected. It isn't immediate, but it's powerful and it's undeniable. This delayed realization is often the most difficult to bear. They have to live with the knowledge that they lost someone who once gave them everything, someone who loved them with sincerity, and someone who was willing to endure more than most would. They may try to fill the void with other people, with distractions, with empty comforts, but none of those things will ever replace the truth of what they lost. They can try to ignore it, try to convince themselves it's not a big deal, but the feeling of regret, of knowing they took you for granted, will gnaw at them from the inside. What makes this form of justice so powerful is that it doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't require you to stand in front of them and demand an explanation or an apology. Your absence alone becomes the reflection of your worth. It becomes the mirror in which they see the full extent of their mistakes. And the pain they feel is not the same as the pain they may have caused you. It's not the anguish of betrayal, but the remorse of realizing that they destroyed something precious, something irreplaceable. In many cases, this delayed realization doesn't come quickly or easily. It often takes years of living with the consequences of their actions before they finally understand the depth of what they lost. And by then it's too late. The apology they may offer no longer holds the same weight because they've had the time to reflect on their own shortcomings, and they realize that the real justice is in the absence of the one who once gave everything to them. That absence is the loudest form of justice they'll ever experience. You don't need to seek revenge to make them feel the pain you felt. Time will do that for you, and in doing so, it will show them a reflection of their own mistakes. The most powerful form of justice doesn't come in retribution, it comes in self-awareness. And the truth is, the longer they take to understand the consequences of their actions, the more they will suffer for it. So, let it be. Let them live with the knowledge that they once had something they didn't appreciate. Let them feel the weight of their choices. And in the end, know that their delayed realization is the justice you never had to ask for. Your evolution is their silence. There are moments in life when you experience profound growth, when the person you once were fades into the background, and the new version of yourself begins to take shape. These are the moments that mark your evolution times of inner strength, clarity, and self-awareness. And while this evolution is deeply personal, it often impacts those around you in ways they never expect. For the people who once knew you in a certain light, your transformation can be both a blessing and a curse. For some, your growth will be met with admiration and support, but for others, it will be met with silence, a silence that speaks volumes about their inability to accept the person you've become. The moment you begin to change, to rise above the limitations that once defined you, is the moment you stop fitting into the roles others have cast you in. People like the versions of you that serve their needs, that align with their expectations, and that allow them to stay comfortable in their own beliefs and behaviors. When you evolve, you challenge that comfort, you force people to see you differently, to understand that you are no longer the person they once knew. This can be unsettling for them, and often the reaction is not one of support, but of silence. That silence is not always about what you've become, it's about what they've lost. For many people, your growth represents the end of something familiar, the loss of someone who once put them first, who once allowed them to be the center of attention, the one who was always there to pick up the pieces of their lives. When you evolve, you stop being the person who will always give without taking. You stop being the person who allows them to remain stagnant in their own weaknesses. You become someone who no longer tolerates being overlooked, who no longer accepts being undervalued. And for some, that change is hard to handle. They built their identity around the version of you who was always available, always forgiving, always understanding. But this new you no longer fits into their plans. The silence they offer in response to your evolution is their way of expressing their discomfort. It's not that they are happy for you, it's that they are confused, threatened, or even envious. They may not know how to relate to the new version of you, or they may feel guilty for taking you for granted in the past. Whatever the reason, their silence speaks volumes about their inability to come to terms with your growth. They can't bear witness to your success, your strength, and your transformation because it forces them to face their own stagnation. For many of these individuals, your evolution highlights their own shortcomings, their own lack of progress. They've been comfortable in the life they've created for themselves, and your growth challenges the comfort. The new version of you shines a light on their inability to evolve, their reluctance to confront their own flaws, and their resistance to change. Your evolution, in many ways, becomes a mirror reflecting everything they are too afraid to face in themselves. And instead of using your growth as motivation to better themselves, they retreat into silence, unable or unwilling to engage with the person you've become. This silence is often a form of rejection, even if it's unspoken. It's their way of distancing themselves from someone they no longer recognize, from someone who has outgrown the role they once played in their life. It's easier for them to remain silent than to confront the fact that the person they once knew is no longer available to them in the same way. They can't reach you in the way they once could, and that creates a chasm between you. The silence grows louder as they attempt to come to terms with the fact that they no longer have a hold on you. Your transformation has created a divide that they don't know how to cross. But here's the truth: their silence is not your problem, it's their insecurity. It's a reflection of their own fears and limitations, not of your growth. They may never be able to accept the new you, and that's okay. You didn't evolve for them, you evolved for yourself. The person you've become is not something they are entitled to understand or accept. Your growth is not dependent on their approval, and their silence does not diminish your worth or your progress. In fact, their silence can be a sign that you've made the right choice in evolving. It's proof that you are no longer held back by the expectations and limitations of those who refuse to grow alongside you. It's evidence that you've outgrown the small space they once had for you in their lives. And while their silence may sting at first, it ultimately reveals the true nature of your relationship with them. The people who can't handle your growth were never meant to go with you on the journey of self-discovery. Their silence marks the end of that chapter and the beginning of one where you can move forward without the weight of their doubt, jealousy, or unwillingness to change. For the ones who truly value you, your evolution will never be met with silence. They will cheer for you, support you, and celebrate the person you have become. These people will see your growth not as a threat, but as an opportunity to learn, to evolve themselves, and to build a deeper, more meaningful connection with you. They will recognize the power in your transformation and use it as a catalyst to grow alongside you, not in competition, but in harmony. But for those who remain silent, who pull away, who can't face the new version of you, it's time to let them go. Their silence will no longer hold power over you. Instead, use it as fuel to continue evolving, to keep rising, and to embrace the person you've become. Your growth is a reflection of your strength, your resilience, and your ability to thrive in the face of adversity. And while their silence may hurt, it ultimately has no bearing on your path forward. Your evolution is your victory. It is a testament to the work you've done on yourself, the battles you've fought, and the lessons you've learned. And while some may refuse to acknowledge it, the truth is, the person you've become is far too powerful to be diminished by their silence. Let that silence speak for itself. Let it mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new, more liberated journey, one where your growth is celebrated by those who are ready to walk beside you.